After an offseason filled with speculation, the Minnesota Vikings are expected to release Dalvin Cook today. What does all of that mean for the direction of the franchise? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Luke Braun. Let's find some joy today. You can find this show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is an audio platform, YouTube, or even Amazon Fire or Roku. You can also find the show on the SiriusXM app. That is a very fun partnership that we're all very excited about over here. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL, and when you enter promo code LockedOnNFL, they will throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. Special shout out to those of you who do listen to this show every single day, my hashtag everydayers, but I am going to guess there are a few people who are interested in the Vikings news listening to today's show, because today is most likely the day that they will release Dalvin Cook. There is still technically some chance of a trade being processed or something like that. It's sort of a Hail Mary. I believe we probably would have heard about it by the end of Thursday if that were going to happen, but not over till women sing. Nailed it. So here's where I want to go with this. First off, I'll give you all the details on the money and how this kind of came to pass and all that stuff. Fill people in who haven't been following this incessantly and F5ing their Twitter page every 3 seconds for the last 3 months. But also where it leaves the Vikings running game. And I think the question a lot of people have is, are they what is their plan? Are they rebuilding? Aren't they rebuilding? They're restructuring Kirk Cousins and pushing cap down the road, but also getting rid of people. And what's the deal, right? And I think that question is pretty easy to answer if you just choose to think about it in a different way. So I'll get to that at the end of the episode. But first, the nitty gritty details, right? Dalvin Cook, going to be released, right? No longer going to be a Viking. He will hit free agency. No compensatory picks or anything like that, in case you were wondering. Because he's being cut in the middle of his contract. He was going to make $14 million in 2023, and that was never going to be tenable. So it was always going to be one of three outcomes. Either he takes a pay cut to stay a Viking. I guess they could have done if they really, really, really liked keeping Dalvin Cook, they could have done an extension with a big signing bonus that gets his cap hit down and do the restructure thing. That probably wasn't going to be the case, right? With a 28-year-old running back with a history of shoulder problems. And I know he got the surgery and that's supposed to be behind him, but you can only ever trust that so much. And plus, how many good years are left in a running back of that age? Running backs age a lot faster. Usually I would say, under 30, I'm not worried about anything. But with running backs, it's a little different. That's a lot of wear and tear that position takes. So there's that. So the Vikings, I believe, will save in total $9 million on the 2023 cap. However, they will take 3.1 mil next year because we are post June 1st. That means that the dead cap kind of gets split up. And the way that a post June 1st cut is seen is when it comes to prorated signing bonus, guaranteed salary, all of that stuff, the cap sees it as you kept him this year but cut him next year. You don't keep all of the unguaranteed salary on the books, which was a large portion of Dalvin Cook's contract, but essentially because there were 2 years left on his contract, including this one, this year stays the same, and whatever's left over turns out to be 1 year, goes into 2024's cap. So there will be a $3 million dead cap hit for Dalvin Cook on 2024. There are much worse dead cap hits that you can get mad about on 2024 if you're really mad about that. But considering that Dalvin Cook was also slated to make 15 mil or something like that in 24, the 2024 cap amount has also gone up again. So they're up to $54 million in cap space in 2024. That counts a big dead cap hit from Kirk Cousins, right? When his contract voids out, he'll cost $28 million in just penalties on the Vikings cap. So that includes that. No, that $54 million is already factored that in. also has already factored in what will probably be the majority of Justin Jefferson's cap hit for 2024, which the fifth-year option is already calculated into that $54 million number. And usually those contracts, a lot of times they'll just keep that number in place. Maybe they'll tack a little bit of extra onto it or something like that. But for the most part, that's going to be around that ballpark. They also have $20 or $22 million in cap space this year, depending on what happens with offset language. So let's talk about offset language. This was pointed out by Brad Spielberger. There's a listener to the show that's been pointing this out forever too. So this is the way it works. So the Dalvin Cook contract has $2 million guaranteed to Dalvin Cook. That guarantee kicked in March. It actually kicked in when he had his shoulder surgery because it's guaranteed for injury. Either way, $2 million of guaranteed salary to Dalvin Cook. Now, if that were that and the Vikings cut him, the Vikings would just pay him that $2 million guaranteed. Hey, we guaranteed this to you. We've got to take that up against our salary cap, but we don't get anything for it. It's dead cap, right? The offset language is essentially language in the contract that says if we cut you, but then you go sign to another team, that other team assumes this portion of the cap burden. That $2 million is part of your new contract is now no longer on our books. And essentially it means, hey, we may cut you and we don't necessarily need to be on the books for that $2 million as long as you get it from someone. That's really what offset language is meant to do. As long as you get it from someone, you get your $2 million. So you will get $2 million from the NFL. If nobody signs Dalvin Cook, the Vikings will pay it to you. But if somebody else signs you, then that contract will make sure that you're going to get at least $2 million and we're good to go. As long as he's not signing some vet minimum nonsense, right? Which I find fairly unlikely. For, I'm sure, NFL people, fantasy people that are just wondering what's going on about this, keep your eyes on Miami. He has been very vocal about wanting to be a Miami Dolphin, both in sort of subtle ways. But also, I mean, his personal trainer went on a podcast and was like, yeah, he wants to be a Dolphin. Like, there's been reports like, yeah, he loves Miami. I mean, he's from Miami, right? It totally makes sense. He wants to be a Dolphin, and that has not been like a secret that has been kept as much as is, it's not like inappropriate or anything like that. There's no shade being thrown, but he wants to be a Dolphin. So that would be where I first keep my eyes. I know Buffalo has had some interest. Other teams have had interest as well, but I'm going to guess Miami gets first right of refusal. Circling all the way back, though, if the other team, say it's Miami or whoever, pays Dalvin Cook a contract that totals at least $2 million, which does not feel like a high bar to clear, then the Vikings will have $22 million in cap space for 2023. So where does that leave the Vikings? That's an interesting question. They've got a new running back room with, Alexander Madison and the Madisonettes, I guess, just kind of a whole bunch of guys competing for RB2. That's an interesting thing. Today's news kind of inspired me to go take a look at like Wongwu and Chandler and see what I thought of their preseason tape. So I've got some thoughts there. And also, what are the Vikings doing? Is a question I have been getting a lot. What's the plan? What's their direction? What's their identity? I think it was Kay Adams. Like, they're having an identity crisis. We'll get into all of that. But before I do that, let me stop and take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's episode, which is Birddogs. Birddogs make you look good. They sell stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, give you that perfectly sculpted, juicy, meaty, thick, ripped, swole, and delectable look up in that thigh. Birddogs shorts do the same thing that like Lululemon does, but they fit way better than regular shorts because regular shorts are made of this like stiff, restricting cotton that isn't as comfortable and won't like form fit as well. Birddogs has fixed this issue by inventing a cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, and you still get all of the fashion advantages of khaki, but it stretches so you get a nice slim fit that doesn't have to sacrifice movement or comfort. And they use an anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, especially to those of you who listen every single day. My hashtag everydayers for your second piece of Vikings content, I would love it if you went over to my Patreon page, patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL, where I often do companion pieces to these podcasts. It's an audio medium. The majority of people have listened to this. Thank you to those of you who are watching. But the majority of people listen to this, so I can't really do visuals here. Plus, there's like rules on YouTube about it. But on Patreon, I can get a little bit more nitty gritty with film and stuff. So please go check that out. The last thing I posted there was about Jay Ward. And there's a free one you can watch about Ed Ingram if you want to see how Ed Ingram did. I thought he got better over the course of his rookie season, kind of explained why I think that. But moving on to where the Vikings are, and this might be my next Patreon piece, is what do we do about the running backs now? There's now the word is official. Okay, there's no Dalvin Cook. We've all had this penciled in forever, by the way, in the Minnesota world. If you have not been paying attention to the Vikings offseason, we've had this penciled in for forever. So nobody is surprised by this move or anything like that, as long as they were like tuned into the Vikings. And if not, hi, welcome. We'll get you caught up. So that leaves the Vikings in a place where they've got like 22 million cap space and 54 million cap space next year. So they've got money to play with here. How much of that goes to Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, maybe Danielle Hunter? That all remains to be seen. So you're not going to get all of that. And I'm not going to try to speculate on amounts right now. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. By the end of camp, we should have those answers one way or another. But whatever's left over from there, then you can start looking and saying like, hey, I think Frank Clark is still out there, which I believe he is. Jadeveon Clowney is still out there. Like there's some interesting names at edge rusher, especially. And if you listen to yesterday's episode, there's like uncertainty with Danielle Hunter now. So maybe that's something you want to do, right? Or maybe you want to go back to having 3 edge rushers, keep Danielle Hunter, sign Jadeveon Clowney, Marcus Davenport, and have a sick rotation like we were all getting excited about when that was Zadarius Smith. So that's something that they could do with the money. But what they have on the roster right now is sort of a 4-man world plus CJ Ham and an open roster spot. I believe they're at 89 right now. First up is Alexander Mattison. Now, I know a lot of fantasy people are talking about this, and this is kind of that time of year where everybody's doing their dynasty drafts and trading players and really thinking about it. Alexander Mattison is probably going to be overvalued right now. If you want to buy into Alexander Mattison, understand this. He will get like 60% of snaps. And really with fantasy, that's what you're chasing. You're chasing snap share more than who is the best running back, right? Because eventually those numbers will add up if you get the volume. You're looking at, I'm going to guess a 50-60% carry share. And he's a 3-down back. He will get entire drives where he's the guy. And then you'll probably have him be spelled by some combination of Kene Nwangwu, Ty Chandler, and Dwayne McBride. I could see all 3 of those guys making the team. I could see just 2 of those guys making the team. It really depends on camp, and I think it's pretty open. To start OTAs, Chandler and Nwangwu were splitting second-team reps. So that means true competition. Best man wins. And then Dwayne McBride didn't participate in a lot of OTAs because he was still dealing with the same hamstring injury that was bothering him at the combine. It's only been like 2 months, right? So he did get in like at the end of OTAs, so he should be fine, but just bear in mind that was happening as well. So Chandler versus Nwangwu, that's really what we've got right now. Who is going to be RB2? And Dwayne McBride maybe can come in and steal that from them in camp when he's fully healthy, but we kind of have to put him to the side for now. So I went back to the preseason where we got the most exposure to Kene Nwangwu and Ty Chandler, and I kind of saw, okay, who do I like better right now? Now, it's been a year, so these guys maybe have come along a long ways from then. And I'm excited to see what kind of progress that they've made from camp. But I guess our last exposure to these guys as running backs, unless you count, there was also a couple of snaps in Dallas for Nwangwu. I didn't look at those. I was looking mostly at preseason for convenience sake. But here's where I landed on, at least on Nwangwu. If you watch Alexander Mattison run like a zone, just a classic outside zone play, which is what the Vikings like bread and butter was. And by the way, I'm going to get a lot more serious about the run game in the next week or two, and explaining the run game and the actual plays and the reads and what they're going to ask of the backs in general. But basically what we saw last year, which there won't be like none of it, but it'll be a little different, was outside zone, which is really, really simple. I just did an episode, how modern run games work, and outside zone was my example. And essentially you just read front of the play to the back of the play, right? Is the outside open? Okay, if so, I'm hitting it. Can I get the edge? If I can get the edge, I'm getting the edge. It's outside zone. If I can't get the edge, I'll go to the inside of the tackle or the tight end if there's a tight end. And if I can't get that, I'll go into the inside of the guard, and then I'll go between, the center and the other guard, and so on and so forth. You just read your way across the play. And you have to get through that really, really quickly. You watch Alexander Mattison do that read. You can see his eyes, bump, bump, bump. He's on the third gap before he even gets the ball. And that's the way it has to be. That's the NFL speed of reading these reps. You can see that he is on the third read of his gap. And you're really just going, is there a guy in it? Yes, no. Is there a guy in it? Yes, no. It's not nearly as complicated as like a QB read where you're reading corner leverage and all. No, it's, is there a guy in that gap? Is there a guy in that gap? Is there a guy in, is my lineman winning? Is he winning? Is he winning? What did we get? And he is on his third read before he even gets the ball. And it allows him to be a lot more judicious about which gap he chooses. I think there is a thing about Alexander Mattison not having good vision. It's like a reputation thing. And I think that's mostly because of a bunch of people being wrong about a 4th and 1 play that happened a couple years ago. But I think Alexander Mattison's vision is by far the best in the Vikings backfield right now. Unless Ty Chandler or Kene Nwangwu are a lot better at it than they were last preseason, which is 1,000,000,000% possible. Absolutely. But from what I have to work with, what I have seen, Alexander Mattison runs it really, really quickly. And I think that is not, shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Nwangwu, when he gets the ball, he is still making read 2 and 3 after his first couple of steps. And he is not a smooth transitioner from one gap to the next, very subtle adjustments. You're not trying to get going from, all the way leftward momentum to all the way rightward momentum like you would on, say, a kick return, which Nwangwu was very good at. And the jump cut, stick your foot in the ground and cut back is really, really good. But otherwise it's slows him down. And sometimes he actually has to take 2 kind of gallop steps to get truly going the other direction, right? So you get this combination of he's too deep in the run play and he's taking too long to get over there. And it leads to holes not being as open as you want. And I'm talking about the subtlest little differences in time, but for a running back, that's the way it works. The run game develops quickly. So running backs, every tiny little millisecond is crucial. And I think Chandler, it's hard for me to tell exactly how he reads too, because I can't stop looking at how his feet bug me. And maybe I'm just bad at this, but from what I understand, when you run outside zone, you should pivot 90 degrees so that your hips are pointed at the sideline or at your aiming point, which is the butt of the tackle or the tight end sometimes. So your hips should be pointed kind of where you're going to be running. If you watch Dalvin Cook run outside zone, you will see his first step is almost it's like a Jamiroquai, pivot, and then he takes off. Ty Chandler's isn't really as efficient, and I feel like it leads to him needing more steps to truly get onto his path and then burst through. And I think that there's just a lot of cleanup to do. Plus, I think there's a little bit of wasted motion with him setting things up. Now, what I love is that he is very, very aware of defenders that are coming in. And I'm watching preseason tape here. So we're dealing with Kyle Hinton and Jesse Davis and Austin Schlottman and guys that are not as good, but it's also the Raiders twos who were crapping their pants the entire time. So, grain of salt with all of that. And in terms of how often he had to deal with, oh man, this blocker is totally going to is totally going to get his face crossed by this defender. I need to set him up and be responsible for this defender. That happens maybe more often than is fair to Ty Chandler, but it's nice to see him in that situation handling it properly, where you attack one gap and then at the last second reveal that you're attacking the other gap instead. Give him not that much time to flash across the blocker's face. So I like that about Chandler, but I think that there are mechanical things that need cleaning up. And that's also the kind of thing, when it comes to vision of a second-year player and he's reading the play too slowly, you're going, okay, I don't know if that's going to come around, right? Maybe he gets more used to it, and it does. It totally could, but it's not easy to hang your hat on. When it comes to footwork, that's drillable a little bit more. That's something that it's a little bit of experience. You get a little bit more used to it. He's also, Ty Chandler thinks a lot, and maybe he doesn't need to be as thinky when he is getting to the actual hole. Just go hit it. Sometimes he's dancing around trying to get the perfect angle. Just go hit it and get an arm tackle and break through it. That's your job, right? So that's where I see the battle right now. If I had to pick right now, based off of that preseason tape, I would pick Nwangwu with a bullet. But obviously, It's been a year. Long way to go. And I'm really excited to see what the differences are between that current evaluation and what we actually see in camp. I have no idea what it's going to be, and that's really fun. But let's zoom out to a big picture, which I don't think is necessarily appropriate all the time, but I'll get to that and ask the question. Everybody's asking the question. Are the Vikings rebuilding or not, or what are they doing? And this is especially for national folks who maybe just follow the NFL from a distance, who aren't like super embroiled in the Vikings. Well, I am, and I am here to catch you up. So let's do that next. All right, everybody, let's do the 300th segment that you have heard this week on Win Now versus Rebuild. This is a really original content idea that only I have ever talked about. You can tell I'm annoyed with this talker, but I feel like I do need to at least address it once. And I get it in every mailbag anyways, too. So here is the dilemma, right? I think Madden fantasy has really influenced the way that we look at things. I think like a company like PFF, a lot of the content they put out is written through this lens as well. And you know, you see like the trust the process that we saw from like the 76ers in basketball, but then like Sashi does it with the Browns, and the tanking that the Miami Dolphins did. Those are the two real big examples. I guess we will see an example with the Bears come to fruition eventually, but that one's not ready to be judged yet. And I think these really high profile examples, plus stuff about the draft lottery. What was the Dallas Mavericks this year? Did a big tank and like didn't get what they wanted. When you get to that, I feel like it has poisoned our brains to think of roster building strategy as you can only do one of two things. And like, if you're a dynasty fantasy manager, there may be a little bit of truth to that, right? Where, hey, I don't have the roster. I just have to like sell everything off and try to rebuild from scratch. In Madden, like franchise mode, which I think a lot of people get this information from as well. And I'm sorry if that sounds like insulting, but I really do hear that same language. That's exactly what you do, right? You take over a franchise for an ailing team. You trade away all their players. You exploit the extremely poorly evaluated trade market in a Madden franchise mode. Like, it's super broken and easy to exploit. And then you go draft a whole bunch of superstars and you win 1 million Super Bowls, right? This is easy. In the NFL, not only is there the whole deal, like you can't turn like firing off. So if you get 2-3 win seasons because, well, I was tanking and I was amassing picks, they go, okay, but you sucked and nobody is buying tickets anymore, so you're out of here. And now somebody else gets to go spend all those draft picks you sacrificed your career for, right? There is that dynamic. But I don't want to talk about that today. More so, I want to remove this dichotomy at all. I want you to stop, as best you can, stop asking the question, are they trying to win right now? Because the answer amongst 32 NFL teams, once they get on that field and the ball is in a person's hands, the answer will always be yes. And so you don't get too much of a differentiating factor. Instead of asking, are they trying to build, right? Are they rebuilding? Instead of asking, are they, ask, what are they building? What are the Vikings trying to get to? And then how they get there, they can choose the really slow, lurching, arduous path of, tearing everything down, turning into the Bears, being in laughing stock for a while, building everything up slowly. I mean, the Bears have built up some, but they've also gotten like a lot more role players than superstars and cornerstone players and stuff, because they're not trying to build Rome in a day. It's going to be a long process over there in Chicago. So you could go through all that, or you can put your eye on the prize and say, this is the kind of roster I want to have eventually. And then you can say, all right, what's the best way to get there, right? What's the quickest, cheapest, easiest way to get there that keeps us from wasting years of Justin Jefferson's prime? This is the last year that Justin Jefferson's going to be even remotely cheap. How do we not waste that, right? How do we not waste years of Christian Darrisaw's rookie contract, years where Brian O'Neill isn't an old guy? Years where we still have Harrison Smith at all, right? Everything is fleeting and everything has a clock on it. So time is of the essence. Giving up a season is a pretty immense cost. How do we get from point A to point B roster-wise without losing that? That's the strategy. So forget, going down and building up, and they're building something. They're just not unbuilding the other thing first. They're remodeling, right? Maybe that's a way to put it. Can I do a metaphor? And maybe that will get people to stop asking the same identity question. I got the words identity crisis in my head because that was a Kay Adams clip that I saw on Twitter, but it's far from just her. It's like everybody national and half of the Minnesota media is going, what are they doing? They're not rebuilding and they're not going all in. Those are the only two strategies I know. And hey, then let's expand our base of knowledge, right? Can you tell I'm like irked by all this? So let's approach that question. What are they building? And I think that's a whole show, right? And I think that's a really interesting show. And I think that's going to be a Patreon too, if we're being honest. But the thing that they are building is not that far from offensively. It's not that far from what they've built before. They've got this McVay system that's installed. They're going to transition it to the Shanahan version of that, which is not wholly different. But it does have some key differences that are very interesting and worth getting into it another day. But a lot more Josh Oliver and CJ Ham and a lot less. Let's just live in 11 personnel and use the same guys every single time to try to make it hard to guess, right? We're going to get our deception a different way and use different personnel packages and hunt matchups. And defensively, there's going to be a lot of hunting matchups too, a lot of man coverage, blitzing, the Brian Flores thing. We've talked about that. They're trying to build to that. How they want to get there is I think there are a couple of principles that we can understand from Kwesi that are really important. For one, we got commitment issues. And I don't love this. I think there are certain moments where you just commit to a guy. I don't love the way the Vikings have handled Danielle Hunter under Kwesi. I think he is an inarguably good player. I said last year, even though he was coming off that pec injury, extend that dude now. His value's at an all-time low. Get him locked up, right? This year, he made the Pro Bowl. He was top 10 in pressures. He was back to his old self, played every game. Lock this dude up. He should retire a Viking. And apparently they just did a Band-Aid deal. We talked about it a lot on the on the Minnesota Football Party too. Lock that dude up. And being wishy-washy about it and trying to say, let's just make it temp. Let's be provisional. Let's not make a decision yet. Feels a little bit like this is time for Kwesi to be decisive. And that's a critique that I have of Kwesi. He probably should do that. But they aren't committing to anything. They haven't committed to Kirk Cousins. Even if they do commit to more years of Kirk Cousins, feels like it's going to try to be a short-term commitment. I don't know if he's going to like that. That might get interesting. All of the free agents that they've signed have been 2, maybe 3-year deals. They have nobody under contract for 2025. So this is a short-term world right now. Very short-term world. And it is also a world where they have no loyalty to the cornerstones of old. All the Rick Spielman cornerstone guys, Eric Kendricks cut, Adam Thielen cut, now Dalvin Cook cut, Zadarius Smith. Well, he was a Kwesi guy, so that was more of just a 1-year deal. It's kind of a separate thing, actually. But all of those guys, Kyle Rudolph's out of here. That Rick Spielman had a loyalty to these guys. You've been a part of our franchise forever. We're going to reward you. Kwesi is saying, you haven't been part of my franchise, though. I'm going to find my own guys. And that's pretty normal for a GM to want to just get his own guys. So that's another part of what are they building? Well, they're taking Rick's team and turning it into Kwesi's. That's going to mean turnover, y'all. That's going to mean people are going to change. We've been talking about this for 2 years. You shouldn't be surprised by it. Plus those guys, they're not getting any younger. And then we had that issue. The year Zimmer got fired, the narrative going into that year was top-heavy roster. And that top heaviness is what Kwesi inherited. He's trying to fix that problem without going full Bears and being a laughing stock, and now you can't sell tickets, right? And call that the mandate from the Wilfs or whatever, but I honestly look at the Chicago Bears situation right now, and you can't tell me that's where you want to be. If they get out of it, great, but I don't like setting myself up with a problem just so I can look good by solving it, right? I can take a dump in the corner. I'm not going to get any credit for cleaning it up. On that, what a great note to end on. Let's just do that. Hopefully that answers some of your questions, right? It's not, are they rebuilding or doing win now? There's more strategies than that, all right? There's more colors than red and blue. And once you try to really, truly good faith engage, what are they trying to build and how are they trying to build it? And honestly, the best way to do it is just get out of the zoomed out big picture. Just look at each individual situation. And in each individual situation, the way the Vikings have behaved makes perfect sense. I say, except the Danielle Hunter one, they've been a little bit too conservative there, but that's a critique, but I get what they're trying to do. But, with Zadarius Smith, they brought him in. He wanted a big deal. They traded him off. They ended up paying like $11 million for a Pro Bowl season of edge rusher play. Okay, they did that, right? Dalvin Cook situation, he gets up to $14 million cap hit. Okay, you got to go. Adam Thielen, the way that they behaved in that situation, you could take a pay cut. You could say no to the pay cut. He said no to the pay cut. Okay, good luck. Like all of these, Harrison Smith says yes to the pay cut. Great, happy. Like all of those individually make sense. And it's only when you try to apply the same situation and make all of those transactions one size fits all that you get confused. But all these players are not the same. So don't do that. It's not one size fits all. The situation that you have to approach, the way you have to approach an Adam Thielen situation, the way you have to approach a Danielle Hunter situation are totally different things because they're different situations, different dudes, different personalities, different contract things. It's all very different. So look at it individually and it starts to make a lot of sense. And I think if you're really, really confused by the Vikings right now, it's not because the Vikings don't know what they're doing. It's because you don't know what they're doing. And I think that's a problem you can fix on your own. So take the weekend and think about that. We'll be back on Monday talking about whatever goes on. If there's any Danielle Hunter movement, maybe we'll start seeing extension news start happening soon or something like that. Or maybe nothing will happen for 6 weeks and we'll just go back into the Everyman series, which I'm having a lot of fun with. I will see you all for that. And as always, Skol.